Devlog number 2 is finally here. It's time to expand the game to multiple areas, and more importantly, come up with the overarching storyline. At the end of last devlog, the player could not walk off the edge of the screen, so my priority was to get a sort of area switching mechanic to work. In other words, I want the camera to jump to the next bit of level art when the player reaches the edge of the screen. The best way I could think to accomplish this was to add a rectangle collider on each edge of the screen. I marked these colliders as triggers so that I could record when they were touched within the player's script. But I was met with a slight issue. How was I going to know where to teleport the player after the player moves off screen? Hard-coding area positions in the code did not seem like the best idea, since I plan on having a lot of areas. I found a very interesting way to get around this issue. I decided to give each collider an empty child object. Then, in the code, I could access the position of each child object and teleport the player to that position. Additionally, I could move the child object in the editor itself, making it very easy to edit how the player moves around the world. Each collider now points to the next position the player should move to. But there is one issue with this that I haven't addressed yet. The levels consist of several layers that move at different speeds in order to create a parallax effect. But the position of these layers is based on the position of the camera. So, even when the player moves to another section, the off-screen layers will still move. I needed some way to freeze sections when they are not on screen. The easiest way I could come up with was to simply make a public static variable called area to specify which container the camera was currently in. I incorporated this variable with my section changing colliders by storing the area number in the unused Z position. So, if the child object was at the position 1, 2, 3, the player would teleport to 1, 2 and set the area variable to 3. This is not foolproof by any means, but it's simple enough that I can easily fix it should any issues arise. It's likely that I will eventually change this, but it should not be difficult to edit down the line, so I'm not worried. Now that I had that technical issue solved, I was ready to jump into some visual improvements for the sections. I thought that the layers were looking a little too static when the player was standing still, so I decided to sprinkle in some grass on the layers. Each grass object was equipped with a script that used the cosine operation to rotate and sway slightly. I copied this script and used it on some bush objects, but I don't think this really captures how bushes move. Sadly, I haven't come up with a better solution just yet, so I'm stuck with these goofy rotating bushes for now. All the motion on the layers made the building seem exceedingly static. Those gears on the factories are all unmoving, when in reality, they should be spinning. Now, what you might not have realized is that this current level art is not the final art. I actually end up completely redrawing this part of the level later in the video. But, in the name of efficiency, I decided to not finish drawing the level just yet. Instead, I opened my level in Photoshop and masked out the gears. I then drew some new gears and sprinkled them around the scene in Unity. At this point, I decided it was time to step back and consider some large-scale planning. My game's organization was starting to get a little messy, so I consolidated the grass and bush objects into prefabs. This means that I'm creating instances of the same object so that they can all be edited at the same time. I also reorganized the hierarchy so that I can access each individual layer without much hassle. But I soon came to the realization that I now had to think up the overarching story. Without it, I had no idea what to create next. But creating this story turned out to be a lengthy endeavor. I was having a lot of trouble coming to a decision on how I wanted the game to look. I came up with several ideas, all of which I scrapped. Finally, in the middle of the night, how convenient, I had a spark of inspiration. It was this staff. Now, if you've been paying attention to my Discord server or YouTube community tab, this drawing might look familiar. This is because the staff is central to the game. I can't tell you why just yet, but I can say it is a critical part of the story. I started creating some concept art involving this staff. The first was of the player kneeling next to the staff while staring into the enormous face of the being. The background and foreground show that the player is currently in a giant crystalline cavern. This area has a connection to the staff, since the embedded crystal is made of the same substance as the cavern walls. The second drawing was set in the same area as the first, but it showcased a very different event. The being is not in this drawing. Instead, the player's cloak has taken on a form of its own as the darkness grabs the player's ankles. In this scene, there are two main forces within the cave: the humming white energy of the being, and the shadowy darkness from the depths. Both images help me figure out the story, but they also might serve as great concepts for title art. I suppose only time will tell. And now, I was once again ready to take on the process of actually building the game. Up to this point, I had not worried about the size of each screen in the game, but I realized that not standardizing a width and height would cause some issues down the line. It's much easier to keep a camera within a rectangle that is always the same size. So, I chose the large canvas size of 3600 by 1440. I saw some comments on the last devlog asking me why I finished the art before designing the whole area, and my response to that is, I haven't finished the art yet. All the art you've seen so far has just been a prototype. The finished art will retain the sketchy style, of course, but there are many issues with proportions and shading that I need to correct. Also, I needed to fix this bridge. Someone did a horrible leveling job the first time. So, I redrew the whole area in Photoshop, plus a little extra off to the left. I then exported this into Unity, so I could see my first two sections in-game. To make level prototyping easier, I actually took a few steps backward with the visuals of my game. I didn't finish shading the houses, and instead left them with flat solid colors, along with removing the foreground and background layers. This is temporary, but it makes it way easier for me to design the sections when I only have to focus on one layer. This will allow me to design levels faster in the future. Here is a cool behind the scenes of my area switching code in action. When the character reaches the collider, the character teleports to the other screen. The magic really happens with the camera motion. Now, I don't want to leave you hanging. You want to see what this would look like with foreground and background layers. Well, you are in luck. I needed to test the foreground and background layers to make sure that the parallax was performing normally when switching areas, so I just copied over the foreground layers and rearranged them a bit for the new scene. Note, a few small things are still missing here, such as the shading on the buildings and the rotating gears. Also, I made these notes. If you want to decipher them and figure out their lore implications, be my guest. I won't tell you what they mean yet, though. This devlog took longer than I anticipated to finish. I got sick in November and was quite busy with school. I also did not realize that I had completed enough progress on the game to make a full devlog until I checked earlier this month. I think I can definitely get the third devlog out a little quicker. That's all for now. But if you want to watch more of my videos, try picking one on screen now.